Hello and welcome to Regency Rum Bluffers on location. Whilst visiting Lyme Regis, we decided to stay at Colyton, which you can see in the distance. Although Colyton isn't a place that's usually associated with Jane Austen, we discovered that there is a very close link between the Vicar of Colyton, Richard Buller, and Jane and her family. It's really quite intriguing and enabled us to visit a particularly beautiful parish church. So let's visit St Andrew's Church and see what there is to discover. As you will see, the church has many interesting features, including an unusual octagonal lantern top, which is on top of the 12th century tower. It also has a magnificent west window, which would have had plain glass in it during Jane Austen's time. So let's go inside and find out more about the Austen connection. Here is the list of incumbents, and you can see the name Richard Buller, who was the vicar here in Colyton from 1799 to 1806. Although the name Buller might not sound familiar, there is a close history between the Austen family and the Buller family. Richard Buller's father was William Buller, and he was at Oxford with George Austen. William was educated at Christ Church and George at St John's College. William Buller became the Bishop of Exeter, which is the reason why his son Richard was able to acquire this rich living. In addition to a splendid church, Richard and his wife, also known as Jane, had a particularly significant vicarage to live in, which is known as Brerewood House. We were only able to view this from the outside, as it remains a vicarage to this day. It was built in 1529 by Canon Brerewood and was clearly well worth a visit from the Austens. When George set up his boarding school at the rectory in Steventon, William asked him to accept his son Richard as one of the pupils. The boarding school was in existence throughout the time that Jane was living at the rectory, which must have been a very interesting experience for her. Jane, of course, was born in 1775 and Richard Buller in 1776, so he was just a little younger than her. Richard was at the boarding school from 1790 to 1795, which means that he was there between the ages of 14 and 19. Jane would have been between 15 and 20. Very significant ages for both of them. They would have been living alongside each other and eating meals at the same table. Another interesting fact is that from George Austen's financial records, it is apparent that the fees paid by William Buller for Richard's education were twice as high as the fees for the other pupils. We don't know why that was the case, but it may have been that Richard needed some extra support. Richard had stayed with the Austens after his education at the rectory was complete and attended at least one ball as part of Jane's party. This was the ball at Ash, where Jane was hoping to receive an invitation from her friend, and so it was a very significant event. Clearly, Richard was more significant to the Austen family than simply being a pupil of George Austen. From the school at Steventon, Richard went to Oriel College, Oxford, and 4 years later became vicar of this beautiful and very impressive church. It features on the website great English churches, and with good justification. As you can see, virtually the whole of the west wall is glazed, making it one of the largest in any parish church in England. In Jane Austen's time, it was a clear window, which must have created a very light and airy feeling. The chandeliers are spectacular and date from 1796, meaning that they would have been a new and very impressive addition when Jane visited with her parents. They would have created a magical effect, as each holds 36 candles. The side chapels are particularly interesting, as the south chapel is dedicated to the Pole family, and the north chapel is dedicated to the Young family. There is a significant contrast between them. The sculptor of the Pole chapel is Thomas Brerewood, who copied the design from the Lady Chapel at Exeter Cathedral, and the work is exquisite. Jane must have found the reclining figures in this chapel very entertaining. Sir John Pole is to be found reclining, rather casually, on his right side in a suit of armour, which can't have been very comfortable. His wife is reclining on her left side, facing away from him, which gives the appearance that she could not stand the sight of him. The Young chapel on the north side is far less decorative and less entertaining. However, it does have a feeling of calmness and peace, which is very attractive. It is hardly surprising that Richard was keen to invite the Austens to visit, and this is clear from a letter he sent to Jane. In 1805, the paths crossed between Richard and the Austens again. Richard called on the Austens when he and his wife Jane were in Bath, because Richard was taking the waters to assist him with his poor health. On the day he visited, the Austens were not at home, but he left his address, and so Jane visited him and his wife. Sadly, his health was declining, and Jane took the view that the waters would not be capable of restoring him. She was correct, and Richard died the following year at the age of just 30, leaving his wife Jane, a daughter Anna, and a son William. So this is the point at which the connection between Richard and the Austen family comes to an end. It is only a shame that he was not able to live longer and enjoy continuing that relationship, which was clearly a close one. So if you do have the opportunity to visit Colyton, which is just a few miles from Lyme Regis, it is definitely well worth a visit.